Kevin J. Vonck, Director, Planning and Development Review. So our department basically oversees the built environment in the city. We have 4 divisions: planning and policy, which looks at how we plan for the future land use, and where we're going as a city. We have land use and zoning administration that deals with kind of current planning and maybe things that we're talking about today, special use permits, rezoning, kind of how we move forward with entitling projects that way. But I think we were able to work over the last few years to really figure out from a workload perspective, how many permits are we getting, how long does it take to do a permit, and making sure we had the right staffing in place to really look at responsible response times in terms of a business for a growing city. Code of Virginia has some regulations on how long you have to issue something. A lot of those things are like 60 days, 45 days, which is fine, but really not optimal in terms of from a business need. But we came out in 22 with a goal, by that spring or summer, really to be getting towards where our goals were at. And it took us, I think, about
the 5-day turnaround goal.
Yeah. Yep. That summer of 22 till we were hitting that. And I will say, generally we've been at that level.
Why does it take a long time for these to go through?
So it takes a long time. I talk about Code of Virginia in terms of requirements. There are no requirements in Code of Virginia for how long a rezoning or special use permit should take. Richmond's very unique in terms of its special use permit. Really doesn't exist anywhere in the Commonwealth.
Which some people like.
And look, even when we talk about the rewrite of the zoning ordinance, it's something that we should always hold on to. I think what happens and what has happened, when you have an outdated code, it gets overused. And so you have what I say are silly SUPs. You need a special use permit to build something that looks just like everything else in the neighborhood. But because you're doing it after this outdated zoning code came in place, you need a special use permit. We see this a lot of times in R5 and R6. And so you'll have special use permits to build a single family house in a single family neighborhood, but because it's late to the game, it doesn't meet the lot requirement or doesn't meet the setback. Well, guess what? None of the other houses that exist there do either. And so, part of this analysis that we're talking about, one of the things that just came up, we're doing a deeper dive into some neighborhoods, Jackson Ward, for instance, 2/3 of the properties there don't meet zoning. So if something were to happen, you could not build that by right today. You have to get a special use permit to build 2/3 of Jackson Ward.
Because that's R5 or R6?
Let's say R6. There's a few others sprinkled in there.
Sure.
But right, and so to me that's silly. So that's a whole process in terms of why we need to rework the code.
Yeah.
But the special use permit process is just like a rezoning. It's a legislative process, and so there's a few things. One, I think we try and take great care in it because just like a rezoning, and maybe even more so, a special use is something that sticks with the land. So in cases where we talk about outdoor entertainment or nightclubs or uses that in theory are good and complementary to a neighborhood and generally we know who the operator is now.
Right.
That's great, but we also have to think through worst case scenario if somebody were to get in there with maybe not the best scruples. What's the worst that could happen, because that special use runs with the land in perpetuity. So it's not a choice that should be taken lightly, and that's why ultimately the governing body is the one that decides whether or not to grant that special use permit.
How long should a special use permit take, factoring in all that goes into cooking the sausage?
Yes. So
should it take 15 months?
No. So I think one of the things we've talked about is we've, like I said, worked on entitlements. We feel that a zoning entitlement, either a rezoning special use permit, should take about 6 months. That, I think, is our goal that we've set out there. I ran some numbers for last fiscal year, and we were about on average, depending how you do the numbers, on average 9 months. A mean of 8 months, because we had some outliers in there, which was the longest one took 22 months. But again, part of that is, in that particular case, the applicant waited and that they weren't ready, and they decided, all right, Maybe we need some community engagement. Sometimes people need to like get funding together. So there's other reasons. It doesn't allocate. I'll say like what's ours, and again, what's the applicant's
Time, right? The
correct.
time spent.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we feel in terms of, I think a reasonable time period, which is like, I'll say expedient enough to do business, but also careful enough to have time to examine things, should be around 6 months.